I just finished glazing the first batch of pots for the new year, and I only have one task left to do, and that is to stamp them with my maker's mark. However, I have a problem. My maker's mark has the year in it, and since it's a new year, I need a new maker's mark. Hi, I'm Kent. Let's go ahead and design a new 3D printed maker's mark. For the past few years, I have been designing my own maker's mark and 3D printing it, and I decided to put the year in it so I could track my progression over time. I've seen a few different potters do this, and it's kind of fun to go back and look at some of my old pots versus some of my current ones and see how my practice has evolved and gotten better. I can see all sorts of things in my older pots that I never saw when I was actually first making them. So it's kind of fun. So this here is my maker's mark. This one is actually made out of silicone. I 3D modeled this and then made a negative and poured silicone around it. I have another one that's just 3D printed. I can't find it at the moment. And I use these in two different ways. When I'm throwing a piece, I use my 3D printed one to stamp into the clay. And I made the silicone one because my clay body isn't very plastic and sometimes stamping it would crack it. So I actually use this with an Underglaze Stamp pad. This one in particular, I think I found someone on Instagram using it. I forget, it's been a few years now. And it's just like a normal stamp pad, only instead of ink, it's using underglaze. So I use this to dab some underglaze onto it and then stamp the bottom of my pots. Here's what the 3D printed stamp looks like stamped into the bottom of some throwing clay. And here's an example of using the Underglaze stamp on my clay body. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a new version of this with the new year. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the computer. There are two different tasks we need to do. First, we need the 2D design, and I'm going to use Inkscape for this. This is the same software I use to design the profiles for my shape cast pots. It is good at 2D design, and then we'll move over into CAD and do all the 3D stuff. So what I did is I picked out a font that I liked and went ahead and typed out my logo. So this is Dr. K 25. If you want, you can play around with the letter spacing a little bit. So if you go over to the text option, there's some spacing. So I've actually adjusted this, so I've scooched things a little bit together. And then you want to adjust the size. So mine's a little over 2 millimeters tall and 11 millimeters wide. So this is pretty tiny, very similar to my last stamp. It's actually just a little bit bigger. So once you're good with that, you want to go and select the text object and then do object to path. What this does is it converts it from text into shapes. At this point, we can't edit the text anymore, but we can do some other processing that we're going to need. So we want to do some manipulations to the letters themselves. So first, if these are grouped, go ahead and ungroup them. So you go to Object and then Ungroup. That way we can deal with them individually. And I'm going to want a draft angle on my letters. So basically I want them smaller at the tip where the stamp is and to get gradually larger. And normally you can do that in 3D, but since the letters have all sorts of curves to them, that winds up being problematic. So I'm going to do basically a hack here so that it can work better. So I'm going to select the letter and then I'm going to duplicate it. So you can go to Edit and then Duplicate. And then I want to go ahead and scale that letter. So I'm going to change it to percentage up here. And I'm going to make it 130%. So now I have another D. The problem is this isn't centered, so we can move it out of the way. So I'm going to select the first one and then the second one. And then over here in the Align and Distribute, I want to, relative to the first, center it. So now the larger D is over top the smaller D. So I'm going to go ahead and do that to all of them. And now that looks something like this. It's a little bit confusing, but it'll make more sense in 3D. And then I want to basically put a box around this that will be the profile of the stamp that we're going to hold on to. So I can create a rectangle, create a box. This here will make it rounded over, and we can adjust the size as we want. All right, and we wind up with something like this. So go ahead and save that, and we'll move over into 3D. Okay, so this here is FreeCAD. This is an open source CAD software. It's similar to Fusion 360 or some others. I've been using it for the rewrite of Shapecast, so I've become familiar with it. It is not the most straightforward interface, but once you get used to it, it's okay. Go ahead and use your favorite CAD software or whatever works for you. These ideas should work with pretty much any CAD software. So the first thing we want to do is open the SVG. And there's a couple different options here. I want to open it as geometry. And so there we can see our shapes. It's all been imported and it's all just flat. And we see a bunch of different paths here. So these are all the different letters and the corresponding shapes. So now we want to move things around a little bit in 3D. So these numbers are kind of random. You can go through and look at them. You can see that there's a number jump here. There's a rect and then the number jump. So the rect here is the outer stamp. And these numbers will be different for you. And then the second set of paths are the scaled up letters. So these first several, which are the original shapes, I want to go ahead and move it. I'm and we went down by 2.5 millimeters. So now it's gone down. So that's all we need to do there. And now I want to start lofting these together. So this here is the loft command, and I want to take the first one and the second one that's larger, create a solid, and loft that together. So that's the outside of the D. Take the next one, the next one, that's the inside of the D, and I'm going to do that for all the letters. This is what's going to give us the draft angle on the letters themselves. There is an option to extrude these and have an angle, but that tends to fail, I think, because of the complex geometry of the letters themselves. This works reasonable. So let me go ahead and finish this up. All right, there we go. There are all of the letters lofted together. Depending upon the letters you're using, you might have a hole. So the D in Dr. K has a hole in it, so we want to cut this out. So we want to take the first one and the second one and cut it out. So notice that we're looking at this from the wrong end of the stamp. The bottom end is down here. So this is the bottom of the stamp, so this is the narrow end of the taper, and it's mirrored, and that's because we're going to use it as a stamp. We want the stamp itself mirrored. So by shifting the bottom edge of the stamp down, we can get that effect. Back around to the other side. So the next thing we want to do is deal with the rectangle itself. So this we can go ahead and use the extrude command. And then I'm going to do maybe 15 millimeters. And here I can use the taper angle. So I'm going to do this at maybe 3.5. Hit OK. So now that's going to be the part that we hold on to. And the letters are sticking out the bottom. We can go ahead and round out these corners here. Select the face. I want this face. And that face, and maybe 2 millimeters. All right, that's rounded over so it's nice and easy to hold on to. And the last thing we want to do is go ahead and merge all this together. So go ahead and union it. And now we have a single part. So if you want to, you can go ahead and export this as a step file or as an STL. Since these are tiny features, I want to go ahead and export this as an STL manually. So I'm going to do one more step here. So I'm going to go over to Mesh and then convert the part. And I have 1 micrometer and 1 degree angle deviation. Basically, the smaller these numbers, the closer it maps to the surface, but the larger the file is. So basically, this is turning the solid geometry into a whole bunch of triangles. Hit OK. And then I can go ahead and export this. So that was a whirlwind tour. There's several different ways to do this, but basically you want to do something very similar. You want to go ahead and sketch out the letters or whatever shape you want for your maker's mark in 2D, and then pull it into your CAD software and move it into 3D. CAD software usually does let you draw 2D profiles, but I found it much more annoying to do so. It's not really tailored to doing 2D drawings. It works much better for 3D. So that's why I've done it in these 2 different steps. And you want to go ahead and add a bit of a draft angle to your stamp and then extrude the body where you're going to hold onto it. So I've loaded this up in my slicer, and I'm going to go ahead and print this on the high quality settings, so 0.08 millimeter layer height. I went ahead and changed all the wall thicknesses to basically 0.2, and that's because these letters here are very tiny. So we can go ahead and slice it and check things out, and it looks like I basically have 2 perimeters around where the letters are. I can go down. Things start to merge together as we get a little bit lower because of the taper. I think that'll be okay. And then the rest of this doesn't really matter. It's just what we're going to hold on to. So let me go ahead and print that out. And here it is off the printer. So there we go, Dr. K25, that's mirrored. You can see what it looks like sticking up, and then all of our nice rounded corners. I actually printed this a couple times. Getting the letters to print reliably was a little bit tricky, so the settings I showed you were the final settings I wound up using. I actually also printed this with a brim. This is relatively tall and skinny, so it's pretty easy to tip over. So that extra brim there helped it keep stuck to the bed. I did have 1 print failure. If you wanted to, you could make a box and then use this 3D part to cut out the negative, and that's how I made my silicone piece. However, I haven't been using silicone since I've been 3D printing all of my molds, so I'm going to go ahead and use this as a 3D print. It should work okay as a stamp. So next up, we'll go ahead and dab this into the underglaze pad and stamp the pots. So grab a pot, dab some underglaze on it. Rock it back and forth a little bit. If your pot has some curvature, Might be a little bit tricky. And there we go. So there, we lose a little bit of definition just because these letters are so tiny. I think something bigger would work better. I think these do work better in plastic clay. I've already missed these, so I can't do that now, so I'm just using the stamp. However, I did have one other idea and I wanted to try that out. So I went and made this. I basically took the same thing, I scaled up the letters a little bit, and then this is the negative, so this I can use as a stencil. Or at least that's the idea. I'm going to try it out. I lost the center of the D. Basically, there isn't a little connecting bit there. I could potentially change the letters a little bit to add that back in. And I think for this to really work, it needs to be scaled up bigger. So I'm going to take my stencil and place it where I want it. And I got a brush. I'm going to hold this down, get some underglaze, and then just tap it through. There we go, just like that. I think to really get 3D printed stencils to work, you need to tune it a little bit more. All right, I'm going to switch back to the stamp and go ahead and stamp the rest of these. And like everything, practice makes perfect. There are a couple. There definitely is a little bit of technique with how much of the underglaze you pick up and how you apply it using the stamp. As I said, I think I'm going to go back to go ahead and stamping my clay when it's still in the leather hard stage. All right, I'm going to go ahead and do one final check and then load these into my glaze kiln. Hope you found that interesting. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. Thanks.